Nayato Watari was a shy and awkward 16-year-old boy who cared deeply, maybe too deeply, about his little sister, Suzu. Ever since their parents died 2 years ago, Nayato had taken on the role of both brother and parent. The two of them had been passed from one relative to another, never staying in one place for long. Recently, they moved in with their aunt, Tameo, a strange woman who lived in a quiet house on the outskirts of Tokyo. One morning on the way to school, Nayato passed through a sunflower field and locked eyes with a girl who looked strangely familiar. It reminded him of his childhood, when he and a girl once played in a garden that she later destroyed before disappearing without saying goodbye. At school, a classmate asked if Nayato wanted to join a club. As always, he politely said no. He had to take care of his little sister. His classmate muttered that Nayato always used that as an excuse. Then Toki, another classmate, approached him with an idea about joining a casual group, but Nayato gave the same answer. Toki respected him for being such a caring brother and said he was also really close with his grandfather. Nayato was glad that Toki didn't tease him like others, calling him sister-obsessed. Then a cheerful girl named Ishihara Yukiteri invited Nayato to a meeting about building a flower bed. Nervous, Nayato gave his usual excuse about watching Suzu. Still, Ishihara offered to drop off notes at his house since they lived nearby. Before leaving, she affectionately called him little brother, making his heart race. At home that evening, Nayato cooked dinner for Suzu and asked how old she had turned last month. 10, she shouted happily. Later, as he washed the dishes, Aunt Tameo arrived and teased him for looking like his father. She handed him an envelope with a large allowance and told him to buy something nice for Suzu's birthday. Then, oddly, she joked that giving him money felt like giving it to her big brother. Nayato found her behavior strange. She never left the house and always stayed locked in her room. The next morning, Suzu asked him for help with her hair. Nayato said she should learn to do things herself, but Suzu insisted that he always take care of her. They were all each other had left. As he walked her to school, she pointed out some soybean plants, the same kind their mother once grew. When he asked what she wanted for her birthday, she smiled brightly. She was excited he hadn't forgotten. As they walked, a blonde girl wearing the same school uniform followed behind. Later, at school, Toki joked about Ishihara being out of Nayato's league. She had even rejected a modeling scout. Then he mentioned a new student, Takabana Satsuki. Hearing that name made Nayato freeze. After school, the same blonde girl from earlier called his name. Her voice sent chills down his spine. He tried to ignore her, but she chased after him. Annoyed, he demanded to know what the garden destroyer wanted. She smiled and introduced herself, Satsuki. They hadn't seen each other in 6 years. Nayato told her he hadn't forgiven her for ruining the garden. She apologized, but only for her to follow him. She said she had something important to say, but he tried to escape. When she finally let go, he ran for his life. A few blocks away, he picked up Suzu and rushed home, not wanting to be caught. At home, Suzu asked who the girl was, but Nayato just said it was no one. Then Suzu told him what she really wanted for her birthday, a garden where they could grow vegetables together. Embarrassed, Nayato tried to explain they had no space, but Suzu said he could just buy land. Suddenly, Aunt Tameo popped out of nowhere and offered her unused backyard for the garden. Nayato checked it out. It was wild and overgrown, but he agreed to try for Suzu's sake. As he looked around, Satsuki jumped out holding a gardening hoe, scaring him half to death. Nayato was shocked. He asked what's she doing in the backyard. She said she had remembered something she needed to tell him. But Nayato was annoyed. He didn't understand on why she kept following him. All he wanted was to finally start a peaceful life with Suzu. Satsuki, though, insisted he had misunderstood everything. When words didn't work, she acted instead. She suddenly pulled him in and kissed him full on. At that exact moment, Ishihara peeked into the backyard and saw Nayato and Satsuki falling to the ground, kissing like it was a scene from a drama. And Satsuki didn't stop there. She kept kissing him over and over. And truthfully, Nayato wasn't sure he hated it. He woke up later in bed, confused. Aunt Tameo stormed in, calling him a pervert, and warned him not to mess around in her yard again. The next morning, Nayato tried to tell Suzu that nothing was going on with the blonde girl. But Suzu, clearly jealous, ignored him and ran off to work on the garden by herself. Nayato wondered why Suzu didn't remember Satsuki at all. At school, Ishihara wondered if she had really seen Nayato kissing Satsuki. When Nayato showed up and apologized for missing the meeting, Ishihara seemed distant. Just then, Satsuki appeared, cheerful as ever, teasing Nayato about his interest in girls with certain features, clearly referring to Ishihara. Embarrassed, Nayato dragged Satsuki away. On the balcony, she returned the gardening hoe she had borrowed 6 years ago. She reminded him of the times they spent in Shinshu, how they became close friends after he offered her a tomato. His mom once said the girl had a crush on him, but then she destroyed the garden and vanished. In the present, Nayato asked her why. She still refused to explain but said she wanted to truly apologize. She even suggested he could punish her in a naughty way, but Nayato yelled at her to stop messing around. Feeling guilty, she left. Later, Toki asked Nayato to help with something. On the way home, Nayato noticed Ishihara avoiding him. She used to be his comfort in high school, but now everything felt messy. Then Satsuki showed up carrying Suzu, who had hurt her knee. Nayato panicked and grabbed his hoe, but Suzu explained that Satsuki had only helped her and even joined in the garden work. Suzu said she remembered Satsuki from their old house in Shinshu and didn't mind them being friends. That evening, Satsuki walked home with them. She claimed that the garden in Shinshu had actually belonged to her before the Wataris moved in. Before she could explain more, Ishihara showed up and asked to talk alone. The next day, she and Nayato met at the supermarket to buy supplies for the school garden. Suzu and Satsuki stayed behind to take care of their own garden. At the store, Ishihara asked if Nayato was dating Satsuki. He said no and tried to confess his feelings, but couldn't. As they left the store, Suzu suddenly appeared, clearly upset. Seeing her big brother with another girl, she became jealous and started scolding him. To calm her down, Nayato gave her a special gift, a blue gardening hoe he picked out just for her. He knew Suzu didn't like pink or anything too girly. While they were talking, Satsuki quietly slipped away without saying anything. Then, out of nowhere, Ishihara blurted out that she loved Nayato. She said it was because of how kind he was to his sister. Realizing what she'd said, she panicked and tried to take it back. But she was so embarrassed, she ended up running away. Suzu looked around and asked where Satsuki had gone. Back home, Suzu proudly showed off her new hoe to Aunt Tamo. Meanwhile, Nayato stepped outside, wondering if Satsuki had somehow wandered into the backyard again. Sure enough, he saw a flash of blonde hair in the garden, just like that summer 6 years ago. Satsuki welcomed him back and asked how his date went. Nayato explained, awkwardly, that he was only with Ishihara because the rest of the group didn't show up. Satsuki laughed and said she wanted to go on a date too, but quickly brushed it off as a joke. Still, Nayato told himself not to fall for her tricks again. He didn't want to feel the same hurt he felt when she left years ago. Looking at the yard, he noticed it was strangely clean. Satsuki casually said she had kept her promise, not by pulling out all the weeds, but by digging everything up all at once. Without warning, she started taking off her sweaty clothes right there in the yard. Nayato quickly stopped her just in time. But then, as always, Aunt Tameo opened the door at the worst possible moment. Seeing the two of them like that, Aunt Tameo lost her temper. She shouted at Nayato, gave him a harsh scolding, and hit him with full force, making it very clear she was done putting up with any of this nonsense in her house. After Aunt Tameo stormed off, Nayato and Satsuki stood up and quietly moved away from each other. The whole situation left Nayato feeling uneasy. To clear his head, he decided to take Suzu for a walk and told Satsuki to go home. But instead of leaving, Satsuki followed closely behind them, saying her house was in the same direction. As they walked, Satsuki casually asked if they were moving again. Nayato, surprised she noticed, admitted that they might. He said he was hoping he and Suzu could finally settle down somewhere for a while. When he told her that his personal life wasn't her concern, Satsuki grabbed his tie and made him face her. Calmly, she said she already knew what had happened to his family. Though it made him uncomfortable, Nayato started to open up. As the sun went down, he told her about how he and Suzu ended up living with Aunt Tameo. Their parents' marriage was never accepted by either side of the family, and after they died, no one really wanted to take them in. They had been passed around from one reluctant relative to another until they ended up with Tameo. Satsuki interrupted, saying that maybe Tameo cared more than she showed. After all, she let them use her backyard to start a garden. Then Satsuki pulled out a few seed packets and handed them to Nayato. Before leaving, she told him that if he and Suzu ever got kicked out, they could come live with her instead. Later that evening, Suzu woke up and realized Tameo was still upset, especially since Nayato hadn't come home yet. She held Nayato's hand and made him promise that wherever he went, he would always take her with him. Meanwhile, Tameo had just finished her shower and was looking for her glasses, only to find her cat had run off with them. While chasing the cat, she accidentally ran into Nayato, who had just come home to apologize. Embarrassed, she ran back into the bathroom. From outside the door, Nayato got on his knees and begged her to let them stay a little longer so he and Suzu could finish the garden. He said it would take time before the vegetables could grow, and he wanted to stay at least long enough to see it happen. Tameo suddenly opened the door, now fully dressed, and asked for her glasses. After putting them on, she bluntly asked if Satsuki was his girlfriend. Nayato quickly said no, she was just a childhood friend. He also added that he had no plans to start any relationship because his only focus was Suzu. Just then, Suzu came into the room and asked if Nayato was done apologizing. Tameo looked at her and told Nayato that if he really cared about Suzu, he should focus on the garden instead of messing around with girls. Nayato smiled. Those words made it clear they were allowed to stay. Excited, Suzu asked if Tamayo would help them with the garden. Tamayo refused, saying she had no plans to do any hard work. Nayato found that odd, remembering how their father once said he and Tamayo used to garden together. At the mention of her brother, Tamayo's mood changed completely. She snapped at him, warning him never to bring up her brother again. Both Nayato and Suzu were left wondering what happened between her and their father. The next day, Satsuki joined them on the walk to school. Suzu happily talked to her about everything that had happened, while Nayato silently questioned why Satsuki kept tagging along. Satsuki noticed his gaze and playfully teased him, making the morning feel lighthearted and peaceful for all three of them. A few days later, the seeds they planted started to sprout. Nayato explained that they were growing a special type of radish that would be ready in about 20 days. Then he brought up a more serious topic. He had found Suzu's test results on her desk and was worried about her grades going down. Suzu suggested he tutor her. With no other choice, Nayato agreed, but not before scolding her a little and reminding her that she needed to learn to be more independent. She didn't seem to take it seriously and clung to him, saying he would always be there to take care of her. At school, Nayato remembered that midterms were coming up. Yukari offered to study with him, but he turned her down, thinking he might slow her down. She kindly asked him to at least think about it and then walked off with her friend. Nayato tried not to overthink it, but his friend Toki teased him about how close Yukari had been lately. Nayato insisted she was just being polite, but his red face gave him away. After Toki left, Nayato's smile faded. He knew Suzu might not be happy if he spent time alone with Yukari. That afternoon, it started pouring rain. Nayato didn't have an umbrella and watched as everyone else left school. Just then, Satsuki showed up and handed him an extra umbrella. When he asked why she hadn't walked with them that morning, she joked that she didn't want to interrupt his time with Suzu and had followed them from 5 meters behind. She teased him about sharing an umbrella, not realizing that Yukari was secretly watching from behind the lockers. Toki also saw everything. Back home, Nayato started to panic, realizing Suzu might have gotten stuck at school without an umbrella. He looked around her room for a raincoat, but instead found a crumpled-up test paper in her closet with a perfect score. He was confused. Why would she hide something like that? Before he could think more, Suzu walked in. Startled, Nayato quickly stuffed the paper into his pocket. Suzu casually said she had walked a classmate home because he forgot his umbrella. Nayato's expression changed and his voice grew sharp. Suzu noticed and asked what was wrong, but he brushed it off and quickly left the room. Out in the rain, Nayato felt guilty. He hadn't praised Suzu for her perfect score or her kindness. He realized he had always thought of her as someone who needed him for everything. But maybe she was becoming more independent, and that made him feel strange. Then he saw Satsuki, soaked from the rain. He realized she had lied. She only had one umbrella and gave it to him. He felt worse, like everyone was hiding things from him. Maybe even Suzu had been pretending to be helpless so he could feel needed. Satsuki noticed his troubled expression and gently reached out. Nayato said he was fine, but noticed she was still soaking wet. Quietly, he took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. He walked her to a rundown apartment nearby and was surprised that she lived so close. When she tried to open the door, the knob fell off. Nayato wondered what kind of parents left her in a place like that. Satsuki told him to go home and warm up, but when he didn't move, she pulled him inside. Nayato hesitated, saying he had to return to Suzu. But Satsuki said Suzu was old enough to be alone. Then she accused him of always ignoring his own feelings and building his whole life around Suzu's needs. Nayato lost his temper. He grabbed Satsuki by the shoulders and pushed her against the wall, yelling at her for saying things she didn't understand. Her silence hurt more than he expected. He turned away and muttered that she would never understand his bond with Suzu. Then he left, leaving Satsuki standing alone. As he walked in the rain, she sat down on the floor, blushing and whispering that she did understand him. Nayato kept walking, thinking deeply. Maybe it was time to stop living only for Suzu. Maybe then he could finally start thinking about Yukari. When he got home, Suzu ran to him, blaming herself for what had happened earlier. Nayato gently calmed her down and gave her sweets to make her feel better. He promised to come home earlier next time. Suzu teared up and reminded him about his promise to tutor her, saying she wasn't smart like other kids. That's when Nayato pulled out the perfect test paper. Suzu's face changed. She grabbed the paper, crumpled it again, and threw it away. Nayato picked it up and told her she didn't need help with math. But Suzu insisted that the score was a one-time thing. She still needed him for everything else. Before Nayato could answer, the room started spinning. His legs gave out and he collapsed. Suzu panicked and ran to call Aunt Tamayo. The next day, word spread at school that Nayato was absent. At home, Suzu refused to leave his side, even though Nayato warned she might get sick too. He kept trying to convince her to go to school, and eventually she agreed. By noon, Naoto woke up and sensed something was off. Sure enough, Satsuki was lying in bed right next to him, staring like nothing was strange. He tried to scold her, asking how she even got inside, but she ignored the question and apologized for getting him sick. She offered him medicine, but it turned out to be a children's suppository. Naoto stared at it in horror, shocked that she remembered such a weird detail about him. She explained it was the kind his mother used to give him. He told her to go to school, but she calmly said school only had morning classes and it was already past noon. She also mentioned trying several ways to wake him up, teasingly hinting they were unusual. Before he could respond, the doorbell rang. Naoto struggled to his feet and opened the door to find Yukari looking worried. Even though he was stressed, he let her inside. She asked to use the kitchen to make him something warm, and he agreed. The moment Yukari left to cook, Satsuki got up and said she would go. She didn't like seeing him with Yukari. But before she left, she sat on top of him and joked that maybe he wanted her to stay. Just then, Yukari called from outside the door saying lunch was ready. Panicking, Naoto quickly pulled Satsuki under the blanket and dove in after her. Yukari came into the room with a warm smile, placing a bowl of food beside him, completely unaware of the blushing Satsuki hidden under the covers. Naoto lay frozen, heart racing, wondering how he would get out of this mess. Naoto still couldn't believe he had agreed to this. Hiding under the blanket had been Satsuki's idea. Somehow, in her mind, it had seemed like a perfectly normal thing to do. Things only got worse when Yukari, who had come to visit, noticed a box of suppositories lying nearby. Naoto panicked and quickly blurted out that they were Satsuki's, trying to sound casual about it. Meanwhile, under the blanket, Satsuki was squirming to get comfortable. She didn't seem embarrassed at all. In fact, she held Naoto tightly, clearly enjoying the situation. Naoto, on the other hand, was sweating nervously and praying Yukari wouldn't notice anything weird. Yukari leaned in to check his forehead. She thought he might still have a fever, but thankfully didn't realize why he was actually heating up. She kindly reminded him to eat and drink water before heading out, finally giving Naoto some relief. As soon as Yukari left, Satsuki stretched under the blanket and smiled proudly, like she had won something. Naoto just sat there, frozen, still shaken from the whole experience. Later, on her way home, Yukari started to feel uneasy. She had visited Naoto to check on him, but Satsuki had clearly been there before her. Yukari told herself it was fine. Naoto had said they were just childhood friends. Still, something about it didn't sit right with her. She paused by a small shrine and prayed silently for Naoto's health. Back at home, Naoto had changed into fresh clothes. He sat down and opened the food Yukari had made for him earlier. Wanting to feel thankful, he took a big spoonful, only to instantly regret it. The rice was overcooked and had a strange metallic taste. Even so, he kept eating. It was from Yukari after all. Outside, in the garden, Satsuki was taking care of the plants while Suzu watched. After a while, Satsuki called Suzu over to help. As they worked together, Suzu started talking about how worried she was about Naoto. While they chatted, Suzu accidentally pulled out a basil plant, thinking it was a weed. It had grown too close to the tomatoes. Satsuki gently corrected her, explaining that basil and tomatoes are actually companion plants. They help each other grow and protect one another from bugs. Suzu listened quietly, thinking deeply about what Satsuki said. Then, out of nowhere, Suzu asked Satsuki about something from the past. She remembered that years ago, Satsuki had ruined their garden. Naoto had been very upset, and Suzu had even tried to chase after Satsuki to ask why. But she had stopped when she saw Satsuki talking to a strange man before disappearing. Suzu asked who the man was, but Satsuki said there had been no one with her. She quickly changed the subject and asked if Suzu had ever told Naoto about that day. Then she admitted she had destroyed the garden because she was angry. She and Naoto had argued, and she had acted out. She said it was something she truly regretted. Suzu suddenly remembered how she and Naoto had cleaned up the garden afterward. She had planned to tell him everything about what happened. But when the chance came, she didn't. Instead, she used the situation to get closer to her brother. She wanted to be someone he could rely on and share something special with him. The next morning, Suzu was surprised to see Naoto already up and dressed. He said he was feeling much better and joked that Yukari's porridge had cured him, though honestly, he couldn't remember much after eating it. Naoto also noticed that Suzu had gotten ready for school all by herself. She said she wanted to be a little more independent now, but she added that she still wanted to depend on him for some things. At school, Naoto wanted to thank Yukari properly, but she was always busy or surrounded by classmates. Some guys warned Naoto not to get his hopes up. They said Yukari was polite but distant, and no one had ever gotten close to her. Toki joined in and mentioned that he and Yukari had known each other since childhood. He said that Yukari always ended up in strange situations, even though she seemed calm and quiet. Naoto realized that being beautiful probably came with its own problems, Later on his way home, Nayato saw Yukari turning down a group of boys who had confessed their feelings, but she noticed Nayato watching and walked over at him. He finally got a chance to thank her for visiting him when he was sick. Just as he was about to leave, Yukari surprised him by inviting him to a study session. They found a quiet corner in the library and began to study together. After a while, Nayato asked for something that had been bothering him. He wanted to know why Yukari was being so nice to him. Yukari smiled and said part of it was because he was a transfer student. That made Nayato feel a bit disappointed. But then Yukari added there was another reason. She said they had actually met once before he transferred to the school. Back then, Yukari had stayed late at school for her club duties. Wanting to change out of her uniform, she had gone into an empty classroom. Just then, Nayato had suddenly burst in, not noticing her state of dress, and had started asking questions. He was looking for Suzu and had been too focused to see anything else. Yukari said she never forgot that moment. Even though she had been caught off guard, she was surprised by how worried Nayato was for his sister. That memory stayed with her, even if he didn't remember it at all. Nayato felt terrible after hearing what Yukari had gone through. He didn't remember anything about it, but he admitted it probably happened. Yukari, her cheeks red, told him she admired how much he cared for Suzu. She said he felt different from the other boys, most only cared about girls for shallow reasons. She even mentioned the group of guys near the station she had rejected, calling them pushy and scary. That was why Nayato stood out. He was genuine and kind. Nayato suddenly felt a chill. Yukari looked like she wanted to say something more, but instead, she apologized for rambling and left. As she walked out of the library, she saw Satsuki standing nearby. Yukari wondered if Nayato and Satsuki had made plans to meet, but Satsuki casually said she was just waiting for him because she felt like it. Yukari nodded and walked off without saying anything else. Later, Nayato shared everything Yukari had told him with Toki while eating ramen. Nayato thought Yukari was just letting him down gently and didn't want him to see her in a romantic way. Toki disagreed and said it could mean something else, but Nayato didn't get the hint. He decided he would do his best to stay pure in Yukari's eyes so they could keep being friends. Suddenly, Satsuki appeared and said he shouldn't force himself and should just be his true self. That night, Nayato looked at the notes he and Yukari had written together and thought about her words. His classmates' teasing echoed in his mind. He tried to ignore it, but he couldn't stop imagining Yukari's face. Then Satsuki's face suddenly popped into his head, which made him feel even more confused. He remembered the blanket incident from the day before and thought how nice it would have been if Yukari had been there instead of Satsuki. Just then, he noticed Suzu, who had been sleeping next to him, wide awake and staring at him with an annoyed, disappointed glare. Nayato froze in panic and quickly said he needed to go to the bathroom. Meanwhile, Yukari was showering at her house, but her thoughts drifted back to what Satsuki had said. The way Satsuki acted so naturally around Nayato made her uneasy. Yukari wondered if she really was just a childhood friend to him or maybe something more. Still, she chose to believe in Nayato and told herself to be braver so she could confess her feelings someday. The next morning, Nayato was watering plants in the yard. He looked exhausted. Suzu, working on the vegetable patch, complained to Satsuki that Nayato had been acting weird since yesterday. Curious, Satsuki tried to talk to him, but when Nayato turned around, he accidentally sprayed her with cold water from the hose. Soaked, Satsuki sat on the ground while Nayato panicked and backed away, telling himself over and over not to look. At school later, Satsuki teased Nayato about his distracted behavior, saying it was probably Yukari related. She also mentioned that because Nayato had sprayed her with cold water that morning, she got soaked through her clothes. Nayato then realized what that might mean. She could be wearing nothing underneath at school. He panicked, but Satsuki just smiled and said she'd be fine. It was only exam day and all she needed to do was sit. Then Yukari showed up and greeted Nayato. He immediately tried to act normal and claimed he wasn't talking to Satsuki, but Satsuki had already left. Nayato kept glancing at her skirt nervously, which Yukari noticed. Wanting to get his attention, Yukari suddenly invited him to hang out after exams, and even said he could bring Suzu. Just then, a strong wind blew through the hallway and lifted a few girls' skirts. Without thinking, Nayato ran up and hugged Satsuki tightly to keep her skirt from flying up. Everyone stared. Yukari froze, thinking it looked like a bold, romantic move. Realizing what had happened, Nayato quickly let go and tried to explain, but it was too late. Yukari's face turned dark, and she rushed off without saying a word. Nayato dropped to the floor in despair, blaming Satsuki for ruining his moment with Yukari. Satsuki calmly explained she had borrowed some of Nayato's clothes, so he didn't need to worry. But she still thanked him for trying to protect her. Nayato felt even worse. A week passed, and Yukari barely spoke to him. Nayato complained about everything to Toki and Satsuki. That's when Toki revealed a new problem. There was now a rumor going around school that Nayato and Satsuki were dating. Nayato felt hopeless. He was supposed to have had fun with Yukari after exams, but everything had gone wrong. Seeing how upset he was, Toki came up with a plan. He announced that they were all going to the beach that weekend to cheer up. After school, Nayato was deep in thought. The upcoming beach trip with his class should have been exciting, but he felt uneasy. Things between him and Yukari were still awkward, and he didn't know how to act around her for 2 whole days. On top of that, he was worried about his little sister, Suzu. He hated the idea of leaving her alone. After thinking it over, Nayato decided to just bring Suzu along on the trip. That way, he wouldn't have to worry about her being lonely at home. But when he got back to the house, Suzu greeted him with unexpected news. She had her own school trip to the beach, and it was on the same weekend. She looked happy, but also a little sad that they wouldn't be together. Nayato, on the other hand, felt relieved. He smiled and told her it was great news. They both realized someone had to take care of their garden while they were away, so they agreed to ask their aunt, Tamio, for help. Before heading off to pack, Suzu asked Nayato to promise not to forget her during their time apart. He smiled and promised. Then, looking up at him, she asked him to take her shopping for a new swimsuit the next day. Nayato hesitated but eventually agreed. The next morning, he already regretted saying yes. Luckily, Satsuki offered to come with them, saying she needed his swimsuit too. Nayato didn't really enjoy the idea of shopping with her, but it still seemed better than going alone. As both of them walked through the hallway together, chatting and laughing, Yukari happened to spot them from across the locker. She paused, feeling a strange twist in her chest. Toki, who was standing nearby, noticed her expression and casually asked if she wanted to go talk to them. Yukari didn't respond right away. She had heard a rumor at school that Nayato and Satsuki were dating. She tried to ignore it, but seeing them together now made her doubt everything. Toki then asked if Nayato had ever said they were dating. Yukari shook her head. Toki reminded her not to trust gossip unless she heard it from Nayato himself. He also pointed out how Yukari used to be in middle school, brave and honest when confused. After thinking for a moment, Yukari nodded, thanked him, and ran to catch up with Nayato and the others. At the department store, Nayato was already overwhelmed by the large swimwear section. Satsuki and Suzu immediately split off to look at different suits. Soon both returned with revealing designs and asked Nayato what he thought. Embarrassed, he told them to just pick whatever they liked. Satsuki smirked and teased it by holding up an even bolder option. Suzu smiled shyly and asked if she looked cute, but Nayato quickly turned away, flustered, and went off to find his own beachwear. Nearby, Yukari had arrived but hesitated to approach them. Instead, she stayed out of sight and quietly observed. A friendly sales clerk asked if she needed help. Yukari nervously said she wanted something simple, but after seeing Satsuki's bold choices, she changed her mind. She asked for something revealing. The clerk, excited to help, handed her a 2-piece that fit perfectly. Yukari blushed and asked to see a different one. The clerk offered to help her find something better. Then, leaning in, the clerk asked if Yukari was shopping to impress someone. Yukari didn't answer, but her face gave it away. She described someone tall and serious, which made the clerk even more eager. The clerk even brought out clip and hair extensions to help Yukari look more mature. Soon, Yukari stood in front of the mirror wearing a flattering swimsuit and longer hair. She was surprised by how different she looked. At that moment, Nayato passed by, saw her, and didn't recognize her. He paused, confused, before walking away. Back in the changing area, Suzu called out for help with her straps. Nayato pulled open a curtain, thinking it was Suzu's booth. To his horror, it was Satsuki inside, and she had just stepped out of her swimsuit. They both froze. Then Satsuki yanked the curtain shut and screamed. Nayato stumbled back, quickly apologizing. Moments later, Suzu stepped out, smiling, unaware of what had just happened. Satsuki stormed out of the booth, red-faced and angry. Nayato followed her, trying to explain. He gently grabbed her wrist. She turned to him with a mix of anger and embarrassment and muttered softly that he was an idiot. Nayato was surprised. Satsuki usually didn't get flustered even when teasing him. He mentioned that. She looked away and said it felt different when it wasn't on purpose. Nearby, Yukari had finished her purchase and spotted the two of them talking. She hid behind a wall, not sure what she was feeling. She had seen enough for one day. On the train ride home, Satsuki sat across from Nayato and Suzu. She looked thoughtful and asked why he never spoke badly about her. If he did, people might stop misunderstanding their relationship. Nayato simply shrugged and said it was their problem, not anyone else's. Suzu, half asleep, murmured that she was thirsty. Then she turned to Satsuki and asked her to come sit beside them. Satsuki smiled and said it was okay. She would stay where she was and jump in if Nayato ever really needed her. Nayato wasn't sure what she meant, whether it was an apology or something more. Their relationship was complicated. They weren't exactly friends, but they weren't strangers either. They had once been very close, but something had gone wrong. He hadn't fully forgiven her yet, but part of him didn't want to let her go. When they got off the train, Yukari was waiting for them. She didn't hesitate and asked if Naoto and Satsuki were dating. Naoto tried to explain that they were just childhood friends, but Yukari didn't believe him. She brought up the time she saw them kiss in the garden. Naoto panicked. Satsuki stepped in and smiled calmly. She said it had just been a kiss. Then, without warning, she leaned forward and kissed Yukari lightly on the cheek. She explained that it didn't mean anything. She kissed people all the time, boys, girls, anyone. She admitted she had kissed Naoto too, but said it didn't mean anything romantic. Yukari still looked confused, but slowly nodded. Suzu tugged on Naoto's sleeve and asked for a drink, so they all headed to a vending machine. Yukari tried to calm down, telling herself the kiss didn't mean anything. Still, her heart was racing. As she turned to leave, Naoto called her name. He told her again that he and Satsuki were just old friends. Then he smiled and said he was really looking forward to the beach trip with her. Yukari blushed and softly replied that she was too. The next day at the beach, everyone was excited. Satsuki was amazed by the ocean. Naoto, however, kept sneaking glances at Yukari. In the changing room, Yukari's friends complimented her new look. Yukari blushed and looked down at her feet. She hoped Naoto would like it. Naoto stood under the shade, thinking about Suzu. He missed her already, but he also knew this trip was a chance to get closer to Yukari. As he looked around, he spotted her laughing with a group of classmates. He wanted to talk to her, but wasn't sure how. Just then, he noticed Satsuki arguing with a guy. One of their classmates explained that Satsuki had been getting hit on all morning. Naoto quickly walked over and grabbed her by the jacket, pulling her away. He tried to scold her, but she just smiled and asked what he thought of her swimsuit. Naoto looked away, flustered. She sighed and asked why he wasn't spending time with Yukari. When Naoto asked if she was planning to swim, Satsuki admitted she didn't know how. She had always skipped swim class. This was her first real beach trip. She had never even gone with her family. Naoto was surprised. Even after all these years, there were things he didn't know about her. Satsuki said she wanted to try swimming today. Naoto encouraged her, but warned her not to go alone. Just then, Toki walked up and handed Naoto a note from their group. It was a list of things to buy. He said Yukari would be joining him. Naoto took the note and walked off, not noticing the smile Satsuki gave him as she watched him go. When Naoto met Yukari at the shop, he was so nervous he could barely look her in the eye. Yukari misunderstood, thinking maybe he didn't like her swimsuit. To break the silence, Naoto unfolded the paper, but all it said was, "Go have lunch together." They both realized Toki had set them up. And for once, Naoto didn't mind at all. While Naoto and Yukari were off doing their errand, Satsuki and Toki ended up spending some time together by the beach. The others were playing or relaxing, but Satsuki stayed off to the side, quietly watching everything from a distance. She admitted to Toki that she didn't usually get along with other girls, which was why she preferred to keep to herself. Curious about her quiet attitude, Toki asked if she had feelings for Naoto. Satsuki didn't deny it. She admitted she liked him, but quickly added that she had no interest in being his girlfriend. Her feelings weren't about wanting to date him. They were something quieter, something she didn't expect anything from. Toki seemed satisfied with her answer. He told her that in that case, he'd continue to support Naoto and Yukari. He went on to say that he had also made a decision. He no longer wanted to pursue Yukari as a girlfriend. Whatever feelings he had were fading now, and he felt at peace with that. Meanwhile, Naoto and Yukari walked side by side through rows of colorful food stalls. The salty breeze from the sea mixed with the smell of grilled food and sweets. They wandered slowly, trying to decide what to eat. Naoto wondered aloud if Yukari might want something light and sweet, like shaved ice. Yukari smiled at the suggestion and joked about how it would probably dye her tongue a funny color. Then playfully, she stuck her tongue out, catching Naoto off guard. His heart skipped a beat, and he quickly looked away, trying not to blush. After a moment of thought, Yukari pointed out that they should try something with more protein first. She mentioned they could always come back later for shaved ice, and maybe even share one together. Naoto nodded, still feeling lightheaded from her playful gesture. A little while later, Yukari returned holding several sticks of yakitori. The vendor had given her extra, so they found a quiet place to sit on some nearby stone steps. They ate in silence for a while, enjoying the warm, flavorful food and the peaceful moment. Naoto felt incredibly lucky to be sitting there beside her. The sun was still high, but the shadows were beginning to stretch across the beach. Their meal was occasionally interrupted by people walking past them. A few guys glanced at Yukari's way and made side comments. Some even tried to talk to her, hinting that she should ditch Naoto and come hang out with him instead. Yukari tried to ignore them, but Naoto could tell it made her uncomfortable. Sensing the mood change, Naoto gently suggested they head back to their group. Without thinking much of it, he took her hand to guide her through the crowd. Yukari didn't resist at first, but after a few steps, she nervously asked him to let go. Naoto immediately did, apologizing and then complimenting her swimsuit. his words stumbling out awkwardly. He quickly added that he hoped he didn't sound weird or creepy. To his surprise, Yukari smiled and said it made her happy to hear that from him. For a moment, everything felt right again. Just then, a voice called out from nearby. Yukari turned toward the sound and recognized Fujioka, a senior from their school. He approached them casually, spoke a few kind words, and complimented her. Though the exchange was brief, something about it left Yukari uneasy. She didn't say anything at first, but her smile faded as she watched him walk away. After a few moments of silence, Yukari told Naoto that she wanted to go back to the hotel. Back at the beach, Toki began to worry. It was getting late, and Naoto and Yukari still hadn't returned. He glanced. That marks the end of today's anime recap. If you enjoyed the video and want more of it, please support the channel by leaving a like and subscribe. Let's help us reach a current goal of 10K subscribers.